Capitalism is state-sponsored usury. Karl Marx came from an ancient line of rabbis and imbibed the Jewish revolutionary spirit and gave it a new form known as communism. And he understood the other side of the coin very well, because he said the Jewish God is money, or mammon as we say in the Bible. So what you see here are basically two parallel tracks. How can I symbolize this? Jacob Schiff, one of the richest Jews in New York City, and Trotsky, one of the most famous Jewish revolutionaries, collaborate. Schiff gives Trotsky money, Trotsky rents a ship, and got all these revolutionaries, they sail to Russia. Why are they going to attack Russia? Well, because it's the only Christian country left in Europe. From a Marxian perspective, if you're going to say that a revolution is based on class conflict, this makes no sense whatsoever. But it does make sense from an ethnic point of view, because they're both Jews. What do they have in common? They have this sense of hatred toward Christian culture. So what you find after a while is that both capitalism and communism are both working to destroy Christian culture. Lloyd Blankfein, to give you a recent example, chairman of Goldman Sachs, which is a Jewish firm, and he supports gay marriage. So once again, you have this Jewish rich supporting the revolution, destroying the social order. But we don't want to just destroy the social order. What they want to do is create a new social order, a Jewish social order in which the Jews are in control. And the main way the Jew stays in control is through usury. It's not capitalism versus communism, it's labor versus usury. The people engaging in exchange of goods and services in the nation, all of those people taken together make up the economy. We have two choices in this world: base the economy on labor or to base it on usury. And so the ancient world, to begin with, was based on slavery. Aristotle could not conceive of a philosopher without slave doing all the manual labor that would allow him the leisure to philosophize. So slavery was one aspect of the Roman Empire. The other aspect is usury. And these two things go hand in hand because usury creates slavery. And the magic formula that does this is known as compound interest. If you're on the right side of compound interest, in other words, if you're a creditor, the money just pours into your pocket and you don't have to do anything. If you're on the wrong side of compound interest, which is to say if you're a debtor, well then you can do whatever you want and you're going to fall behind, because nothing in this world can keep up with the inexorable nature of compound interest. So you put this together in an empire like the Roman Empire, which basically acquired wealth from plunder, bringing the gold back to Rome. That gold ended up into the hands of wealthy people who would then lend it out at interest. The overwhelming majority started to fall into debt slavery. And so as a result, when the Roman Empire collapsed, because of all the things that's plaguing this country, because of debt, of foreign wars, of enslavement, of the concentration of wealth, and so on and so forth, the new system that took its place was Christianity. Because of the collapse of civilization, the new system was implemented by Benedictine monks, who created monasteries, which were basically self-sufficient little farms, whatever you want to call them, where the monks would have land. They took a vow of stability and they were bound to the land by their vow, and so they would work the land. So given this fact, now we have a whole new world. And the whole new world begins in Europe. It's kind of rocky beginnings, because Europe is being plundered by the warring barbaric Germanic tribes would come down. They crossed the Danube, they crossed the Rhine, they took over the Roman Empire and they set up their kingdom. It would have remained that way forever, except for the fact that the Benedictines taught them how to engage in agriculture. So you're talking about the Christianization of these barbaric Germanic tribes. Over a certain period of time, wealth started to arise in Europe. And at the beginning, when you had economic exchange, money was little pieces of gold or silver. And so what you had to do was carry bags of gold to a place where the buyers and sellers came together. Well, this is always a bad idea, because someone can rob you along the way, and that's it. the Italians in Italy started, instead of sending gold back and forth, I'll just make an entry here and you make an entry there. And so this was the beginning of double entry bookkeeping. And so it was tending toward paper in that regard. So at this point, you have the beginning of the money economy out of prosperity in Europe. And at this point, because we have a money economy, people need money. The problem is that up until this point, you've got an economy for the average guy, the serf, that is based not on money, but on labor. In other words, you owe the Lord 3 days a week. And if you do that, then your obligation is fulfilled. Well, at this point, the Lord doesn't want 3 days a week. He wants money because he's got to buy things. And so how do you get the money? Where's the money going to come from? Well, you got to borrow it. Well, it's immoral to lend money. So who's going to do it? Well, the Jews are going to do it. The Jew would lend you money. And it was a pawn shop, basically. So if you're a farmer, you hock your plow, he gives you money to pay your taxes, and he charges you 43 1/3% interest. Unfortunately, if you're a farmer and your plow's in the pawn shop, you're in trouble. You can't earn any money. And so there's immediate problems. In other words, we're talking about usury causing immediate social unrest that would more often than not, throughout this period of time, lead to the expulsion of the Jews from any country. So the standard Jewish explanation is anti-Semitism. It's an awful thing. Every country they go, there's anti-Semitism. Well, it turns out that the real reason is Jewish behavior. As always, the reason people don't like Jews is because the way Jews behave. And in this instance, it's lending money, which caused huge amounts of animosity. The people rioted, and the first thing they did was head toward the Jew's house to burn the records about how much money he owed. And the king, realizing it's going to be insurrection, just expels the Jews, reneges on his loans, and that's the story over and over and over again throughout Europe. During this period of time, the Catholic Church starts protesting. Franciscans start preaching against usury. For a century, they're preaching against usury. At the end of the 14th century, the beginning of the money era, the serfs were being cheated out of their labor. They were being ground. They needed money. And so there was rebellions in England. In Florence, it was called the Ciompi Rebellion. Always the infallible sign that you're not being paid a decent wage. Whether it's Florence in the end of the 14th century, whether it's the United States in the 1970s. What happened in America is the same thing that happened then. Wages stopped going up in the 1970s, and as soon as wages stop going up, guess what arrives on the scene? Credit cards. And so credit cards take up the slack that wages, and they give the people the illusion that they still have money. When you don't, you're being cheated out of your wages, and the credit card is the proof that you're being cheated out of your wages. Anytime you're dealing with usury, any present solution is always paving the way for a disaster on the horizon because of compound interest. You can never keep up. No one can keep up with it. And there's a revolution that takes place, the Ciompi Rebellion. This is a moment. It's one of those moments in history where things could have gone right because a new dictator, Savonarola, famous Dominican, has a true sense of what Christian culture is all about. And what it's all about is charity. And the antithesis of charity in this instance is sodomy and usury, are the infallible sign that your culture is terminally corrupt, because they're both unnatural. The sodomite takes what is fertile, namely sex, and makes it sterile through homosexual activity, and the usurer takes what is sterile, namely money, and makes it fertile through usury. So they're both bad, and so Savonarola brings about a reform, a huge reform of behavior. Problem is, the Pope is probably the most corrupt Pope in the history of the Church, Alexander VI. Savonarola calls for the King of France to depose the Pope. Bad idea, because the Pope is not going to put up with this. And they arrest Savonarola and they put him to death. And at this point, the moment of reform dies. Just to give you some indication of the power of usury as opposed to any power on the face of this earth, when the Habsburgs started borrowing money from the Fuggers, who were these papal bankers, they started in 1494, around then. The Fuggers never charged them more than 5%. During the course of the next 70 years, the Habsburgs basically became the owners of every single gold and silver mine in the New World. And a river of gold and silver started flowing into Spain, and 70 years later, they went bankrupt. Because not even all the gold in America can keep up with compound interest. Because eventually, all you're doing is paying off your loans. You let it go long enough, you think, oh, I'll just do the minimum payment. Well, that just starts to snowball. The criterion of a just wage is not how far down you can drive it. It's not a commodity like any other commodity that's a function of supply and demand. It is a function of the family, and so the criterion of a just wage is whether a man by himself can support a wife and children on his salary. That is the objective criterion. If that's not it, your society is not just. Well, guess what happened during this period of time? Just as we're talking about the 70s, what was the big craze in the 70s other than disco? It was called feminism. And what is the main tenet of feminism other than making a sacrament out of abortion? It is equal pay for equal work, which is code word for destroy the family. These slave drivers love rootless individuals.
They've replaced English common law, Magna Carta 1215, with Jewish Talmud law. And the Christians have got no rights to property or justice. And this is what we're up against here in the UK. This is the norm. I'm just after winning a case for a client now that are going to be robbed of the property again. I see the judge that he was operating a court without a jury, which is high treason. Where are the English businesses in the high streets? None. 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 And you've got Tesco's, you've got Morrison's, they've all got car parks and double yellow lines outside the English family businesses, and all closed down. And they've taken them over now with a Tesco's inside in every little town and village. Tesco's is in there taking up all the money. They want a war situation all of the time. And then they can come in and rob you. And this is what they're doing. The history of the Jews in Ireland goes back over 1,000 years. So who was the IRA?
Exactly.
Who was the IRA? Another false flag. They want a war situation all the time, so that they can oppress the people.
Because we're animals, we're classed the same as animals.
We're classed the same as cattle, and they're milking us dry.
Turn off your pornography. Don't talk about gay marriage. Talk about something real. Talk about the fact that as a student, you're involved in crushing debt, and it's not right. Talk about the fact that you're underwater. You bought this house and now you're underwater, and you got to pay $250,000 for a $50,000 house because you took out a $100,000 mortgage. Let's talk about reality now and stop talking about the bread and circuses here, all of which are there, whether it's sex, whether it's pornography, or whether it's football, to distract us from the real issues.
Trump's up debt of £6,080 they didn't owe, which is multiplied to £76,000 in an industry created for taking people's property off them for very small amounts of money, setting every trap in the book, playing you out of your rights, being led astray by council officials to play you out of your rights. Every little chance of justice has been preempted by another comparison case to block that, to block every chance of you overturning a debt. My only sin is I had an argument with the council. How dare I argue with the council? How dare you? This is a gun at your head. Hey up, don't come and argue, otherwise we'll take your house off you.
The peace they promise is never-ending war.